Hi, my name is Tom Haddigan. I'm the author and the creator of this new course on Beatles Musicology. Today we're going to listen to a podcast. Bear with me a minute.
All right, so let's imagine for a second. You're walking across that famous zebra crossing outside Abbey Road Studios. You know the one from the Beatles album cover. You can practically feel the energy there. Everyone's snapping photos, but it makes you think, what is it about the Beatles that still has this pull, even decades later? What's that secret sauce that keeps people coming back?
It's fascinating because we're not just talking about a band. We're talking about music that really seems to break the age barrier. And it's not just nostalgia. There's something much deeper going on, I think.
Exactly. And that's exactly our mission today. We're going beyond the surface, almost like musical archaeologists, trying to uncover that particle physics of their sound and what makes it so impactful.
It's like that story that Professor Milton Mides tells about finding solace in the Beatles during a really difficult childhood move. Their music created this profound connection for him, like it tapped into something universal.
And so many listeners say the same thing. It's a blend of joy, mystery, that feeling is being transported somewhere else, almost dreamlike. It's like their music unlocks this hidden door in our minds. But how did they do it? Let's start with the words. The lyrics.
Well, if we look at the early Beatles songs, the lyrics really kind of stick to familiar pop themes. Love, celebration, dancing, pretty standard stuff.
Right, the classics.
Yeah.
But then around 1965, things take a turn. Think magical mystery tour. We start to see concrete, almost surreal imagery instead of those abstract emotions.
And it's interesting to note that John Lennon, he was deeply fascinated by Lewis Carroll, so just like Alice falling down the rabbit hole into Wonderland, the Beatles started to infuse ordinary objects and situations with a sense of magic.
They were masters of it. Take Eleanor Rigby, wearing a face that she keeps in a jar by the door. It's an everyday image, but it's also incredibly eerie.
Exactly. It's that blend of the ordinary and the surreal that gives their music that unique flavor. And that's how we end up with walruses and Eggmen appearing in songs, too.
And let's not forget Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Directly inspired by a child's painting. Shows you that inspiration can come from the most unexpected places.
Speaking of unexpected, remember, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. The entire lyric is lifted from an 1843 circus poster. Lennon even changed some of the wording to fit the rhythm and flow of the song.
That's dedication. It's mind-blowing how they could transform something so simple into a psychedelic masterpiece. But their knack for turning the mundane into the magical went beyond lyrics, didn't it?
Absolutely. They actually kind of deconstructed that entire pop music machine.
Okay, unpack that for me. What do you mean by deconstructing pop music?
Well, think about it. Pop music has all these layers of artifice. The song is a separate unit. The artist's persona, the studio recording, the physical record itself, and finally how the listener consumes it. It's like a glass onion with all these layers.
So the Beatles just went and shattered that onion.
Precisely. They peeled back each layer, creating a more direct and intimate connection with their audience.
I like that. It's like they were inviting us backstage to see how the magic happens.
Think about how they blurred song boundaries. They literally sing, "She loves you, within all you need is love." And there are these musical themes that pop up across different albums. Glass Onion itself, full of nods to other Beatles tunes.
It's like they're creating this whole interconnected universe of music.
Exactly. Then there's how they played with their image. Album covers went from simple portraits to these abstract designs. They even posed as a different band using wax figures of themselves.
Always one step ahead, weren't they?
Yeah.
But let's move from image to sound. Did they even have a specific Beatles sound?
It's more like a genre-bending tapestry, really. You have to remember, their intense musical training during those Hamburg days, playing for hours on end, mastering all sorts of genres.
It's incredible to think they played 6 to 8 hours a day, 97 days straight. No wonder they absorbed so many styles.
It's true, and they didn't just copy those genres, they took them to a whole new level.
But it's still hard to define exactly. What makes a song sound Beatles-esque, isn't it?
You're right. Their early covers, they stuck to original genres. But as they started blending these styles, this really unique sound emerged, something that defied easy categorization.
Take Strawberry Fields Forever. It's a folk. Drone music. It's almost like they created their own genre.
And they were incredibly self-aware about it, too. Some songs feel like they're commenting on their own music, while staying genuinely emotional. It's a fascinating paradox. But let's talk about another aspect of their music, how they played with time.
You mean how they broke free from those typical 2 to 3 minute pop song constraints?
Exactly. Most pop music sticks to that format, but the Beatles, they push the boundaries in both directions.
Revolution 9 comes to mind. A radical sonic experiment. That really kind of shattered all expectations of what a Beatles song could be. Some might even call it noise.
It was certainly a bold move. And then you have the Abbey Road medley, this flowing tapestry of song lengths, some even split into fragments, creating a sense of disorientation and surprise.
It's like they were playing with our perception of time, within the music itself.
And let's not forget Her Majesty, the shortest Beatles song, clocking in at a mere 25 seconds.
A blink and you miss it, Jim. It's like they're saying even a fleeting moment can be packed with brilliance. But they didn't just play with time, they also messed with our expectations of song structure.
Absolutely. Pop songs often follow this predictable structure. Verse, chorus, repeat, and repeat. But the Beatles love to subvert that formula.
Right from the start, they were already challenging the norms. Strawberry Fields Forever famously begins with the chorus, which throws you off balance immediately.
And then there's Happiness is a Warm Gun. It's a wild ride through 5 distinct sections without any repetition at all.
They definitely kept us guessing. And they'd often put these brand new elements at the very end of songs, like that extended na-na-na in Hey Jude. Talk about a grand finale.
And who could forget those unexpected musical interludes? That Dorian Jam in Magical Mystery Tour, the sudden stop in Glass Onion. It's like they were constantly throwing curveballs. Now let's kind of shift gears here and dive into the world of rhythm.
Rhythmically speaking, what set them apart? So much pop music relies on those straightforward, predictable beats.
You're right, and our brains are actually wired to predict the future, using rhythm, often relying on repetition. Think of it like walking, one step then another, a repetitive action.
Okay, I'm following you. So how does that connect to music?
Well, pop music typically uses this. By relying on these binary structures, groups of 2, 4, 8 beats, it creates that predictable, danceable pulse.
But the Beatles didn't always play by those rules, did they?
They were masters of weaving in these subtle rhythmic shifts, introducing this unexpected complexity that works on us subconsciously.
Give me some examples. How do they play with those expectations?
Take Love Me Do. They add an extra bar to the standard structure, subtly disrupting the flow. It's like this little musical hiccup.
So they were already playing with those binary structures even in their early work.
Exactly. Then there's She Loves You, where they actually remove a bar, making the tempo faster.
It's like they're playing this rhythmic game with us.
And they also used what we call triplets, which are these waltz-like groupings of 3 beats, and it creates this disorienting effect, like in She's Leaving Home.
So they blended different rhythmic feels to create this unique texture. What about some of their more complex rhythmic experiments?
I Am the Walrus is a great example. It's built on a blues structure, but they twist it. By grouping the bars in 3s instead of 4s, it creates this surreal, almost floating sensation.
Wow, I need to re-listen to that one with this new perspective. It's amazing how these subtle shifts can be so powerful.
Absolutely. And they'd layer rhythms in groups of 2s and 3s, building this sense of movement and surprise. You can hear it in She's So Heavy, and Happiness is a Warm Gun.
It's like they wove these intricate rhythmic tapestries that draw you in and keep you on the edge of your seat. Speaking of keeping us on the edge of our seats, let's not forget the often overlooked genius of Ringo Starr.
Yes. Ringo deserves so much credit. He played exactly what each song needed, never overplaying, always enhancing the overall impact.
He was so much more than just a timekeeper.
Absolutely. His choices elevated the Beatles' music to another level entirely.
Okay, give me some examples of Ringo's brilliance. What are some of his standout moments?
Well, in My Life, he drops a beat entirely, which creates this space and clarity for the vocals. It's subtle, but it makes a huge difference.
These are those tiny details
that
often have the biggest impact.
Exactly. Then in Ticket to Ride, he catches the middle triplet of the guitar, adding this beautiful rhythmic texture.
It's like he was intuitively responding to the other instruments, creating this seamless interplay.
Precisely. And don't forget Rain, with its hypnotic and danceable trance beat.
That's a classic. It's like Ringo was channeling some otherworldly groove. But moving beyond Ringo, let's talk about something that underpins their whole sound: harmony.
Now this is where things get really interesting. The Beatles' understanding of harmony was truly exceptional.
Right, hit me with the Harmony 101.
Most pop music uses what we call diatonic harmony. It means that the melodies and chords all come from a single key, like using only the white keys on a piano.
Okay, so that's our starting point. How did the Beatles build on that foundation?
They intuitively understood the power of these simple chords. You see, you can build chords from a scale by stacking notes in thirds. Within a key, you get 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished chord.
But how do they make those basic building blocks sound so interesting?
Well, their early songs often feature what we call a diatonic walk, moving through these chords in steps, but more often, they arrange these chords not in steps, but in fifths. Think of it like a circle. The 1 chord is at the center, the 5 chord is next to it in one direction, and the 4 chord is next to it in the other direction.
This reminds me of how Paul McCartney talked about searching for the missing link chord, the B7.
Exactly. They were always looking for new sounds and combinations. And this journey around the circle of fifths, it creates this natural sense of tension and resolution.
Can you give me some concrete examples of how they used this?
Take Twist and Shout. They added 2 extra bars to emphasize that dominant chord, building anticipation before resolving back to the 1 chord.
Clever. It's like they're teasing us with the resolution.
Precisely. And they use different flavors of dominant chords to create different moods. Sometimes it's tense, sometimes mysterious, sometimes it adds this bluesy feel.
So they weren't limited to one type of dominant chord. They explored all its possibilities.
Right. And She's a Woman is a great example of a dominant chord that never resolves, highlighting its unique sound and power.
It's like they're defying our expectations, leaving us wanting more.
And then there's The Long and Winding Road, which uses what we call a gospel sus chord for its expansive, uplifting sound.
Ah, that beautiful yearning quality. It's like the music is reaching for something beyond.
And who could forget A Hard Day's Night? With its famously complex chord, musicologists have recently figured out its structure, and it's fascinatingly intricate.
So they were pushing the boundaries of harmony, even in their seemingly simple pop songs.
Absolutely. And then you have Tomorrow Never Knows, which stays on a single dominant chord the whole way through, reflecting the lyrical theme of stasis.
Wow, that's a bold choice. It creates this sonic world that's both unsettling and hypnotic.
It shows their incredible understanding of how harmony can evoke emotions and ideas. But they didn't just master diatonic harmony, they went beyond those boundaries too.
You're saying they weren't content to stay within the confines of one key.
Exactly. They explored secondary dominance and plagal cadences, creating this more complex and colorful harmonic landscape.
Okay, break that down for me. What are secondary dominance and plagal cadences?
Well, remember our circle of fifths. A secondary dominant is like taking a detour, leading us away from the home chord, but ultimately bringing us back in a surprising way.
So it's like a harmonic side quest.
Right, precisely.
Yeah.
And a plagal cadence creates this gentler, more trusting resolution. It's often used to evoke feelings of peace and acceptance.
Can you give me some examples of how the Beatles use these techniques?
Well, Golden Slumbers beautifully contrasts major and minor chords, leading the listener back home through a series of plagal cadences. It's like a warm musical embrace.
I can feel that. It's so comforting and reassuring.
And You Never Give Me Your Money takes us on a journey around the circle of fifths, creating a sense of toil, and then a trusting release through a secondary plagal cadence.
It's like the music is mirroring the emotional arc of the lyrics.
Precisely. And then there's She's Leaving Home, which has this more ambiguous harmonic journey, leaving the listener feeling a little disoriented, but ultimately satisfied.
It's like getting lost in a beautiful maze, but eventually finding your way out.
That's a great analogy. Now, speaking of getting lost and finding something magical, let's talk about the honey chord.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. What's the honey chord all about?
The honey chord, also known as the flat 6 chord, is this harmonic move that creates a sense of wonder and otherworldliness.
It sounds magical already.
It is. It's like stepping through a portal into a different realm. Remember Lennon's fascination with Lewis Carroll? This chord embodies that feeling of falling down the rabbit hole into wonderland.
I see the connection. So where did the Beatles get the inspiration for this magical chord?
Well, they were inspired by songs like Carl Perkins' Honey Don't and Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue, both of which use the honey chord prominently.
So they were drawing on their rock and roll roots.
Exactly. And they use the honey chord in their own songs to create this shift from the ordinary to the extraordinary.
Can you give me some specific examples? How did they use it to create that otherworldly feeling?
Well, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds uses an extended version of the honey chord. To transition between these dreamlike states, it's like a sonic bridge between different realities.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
And many of their other songs use this magical chord too, always signaling a departure from the mundane.
It's like their secret weapon for injecting wonder into their music.
Precisely. Now let's talk about another way they manipulated harmony. They were masters at combining major and minor scales, creating this spectrum of emotions and textures.
It's like they were painting with light and shade, using these scales to create contrasting moods.
Norwegian Wood is a beautiful example. It seamlessly shifts between major and minor, reflecting the complex emotions of the lyrics.
It's like the music is echoing the bittersweet nature of love and loss.
And Penny Lane features these dramatic drops in the melody, like clouds passing over a sunny landscape.
Ah, that bittersweet nostalgia. They really captured it perfectly.
And Blue Jay Way creates this sense of tension and mystery by staying on a single chord, blurring the lines between major and minor.
It's that feeling of being lost in a fog, not knowing where you are or where you're going.
Exactly. But their attention to detail went even deeper than this. They explored the spaces between the notes, adding these subtle nuances that most pop singers wouldn't even think about.
Whoa, what do you mean by the spaces between the notes?
Think about it this way. Most pop singers stick to the predictable notes within a chord, but the Beatles weren't afraid to color outside the lines.
So they were exploring the full spectrum of musical possibilities.
Exactly. They often sang notes that weren't part of the standard chord tones, which added this unexpected color and complexity to their melodies.
Give me some examples. What songs showcase this level of detail?
Nowhere Man is a prime example. They use every note of the chromatic scale, showing their boldness.
It's like they're expressing the full range of human emotion through those notes.
And listen to Lennon's isolated vocals in Your Blues. He utilizes the blues note continuum, bending and sliding between pitches, creating this raw, emotional sound.
It's incredible how much expression he packs into a single phrase.
And then there's that famous break in I Got a Feeling, where Paul McCartney teaches John Lennon how to curve the melody.
I love that story. It shows their collaborative spirit and their dedication to getting every little detail right.
It's a beautiful moment of musical camaraderie. And speaking of innovation, we can't forget their pioneering use of technology in the studio.
Ah, yes. The Beatles embraced electronic manipulation as a core part of their sound.
Exactly. It wasn't just a gimmick for them, it was another tool for expression.
What were some of the key aspects of electronic music that drew them in?
They were fascinated by the idea of manipulating space with sound, creating echoes in these virtual environments. They also explored what we call temporal dislocation, recording sounds and then reversing stretching or manipulating them.
It's like they were bending time and space with their music.
Exactly. They also experimented with what we call autonomous sound, using electronic instruments that could generate sounds on their own, independent of human input.
So they were constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the studio.
And they did it with such creativity and playfulness.
What are some of the standout examples of this electronic experimentation?
Tomorrow Never Knows is a sonic playground of electronic manipulation. They used tape delay to create these echoing vocals, stretched and wobbled sounds to evoke seagulls, and routed voices through a Leslie speaker for this swirling psychedelic effect.
That song still sounds futuristic today, even though it was recorded over 50 years ago.
And here's a fun fact. That seagull sound is actually Paul McCartney's laughter, manipulated and transformed.
No way. That's incredible.
It shows their willingness to experiment and have fun in the studio.
Are there any other examples of their electronic wizardry?
The guitar solo in Taxman is another great example. They recorded the solo at a slower speed to lower the pitch, then sped it back up during playback, resulting in a faster, higher-pitched solo.
So they were manipulating time and pitch within the recording itself. It's like musical time travel.
Exactly. They also use techniques like double tracking to thicken their vocals and create a richer, more powerful sound.
It's those subtle layers that add so much depth and richness to their recordings.
And we can't forget their use of unconventional instruments, like sitars, mellotrons, orchestral strings, even animal sounds.
Think of that beautiful string arrangement in She's Leaving Home, or the calliope music from an old fairground organ. In Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite.
They were always searching for new sounds, new textures, new ways to express themselves, and that's one of the key ingredients to their enduring magic.
This has been an incredible journey so far. We've covered their lyrics, their harmonies, Ringo's brilliance, and even their groundbreaking studio techniques It's clear they were musical masters. But what do you think is the secret to their lasting impact? Why do their songs still resonate with us decades later?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think the answer lies in a combination of factors. Their music is just incredibly well crafted, both musically and lyrically. They understood how to write songs with hooks, catchy melodies, and harmonies that just burrow into your brain.
They certainly knew how to write a song that gets stuck in your head.
It's true, but it's more than just catchiness. Their music is also emotionally resonant. They tapped into these universal themes of love, loss, hope, and longing. Their songs speak to our shared human experiences.
And they did it with such honesty and vulnerability.
They weren't afraid to express their own emotions, doubts, and fears.
And that vulnerability makes their music so relatable. We feel like we know them, like we're on this journey with them.
Exactly. And there's this sense of joy and playfulness in their music, too.
You can hear how much fun they were having.
Yeah.
And it's infectious.
They weren't afraid to experiment, push boundaries, and just enjoy themselves. And that spirit of exploration is what keeps their music sounding fresh and exciting, even after all these years.
It's like their music has this timeless quality that connects with people on a deeper level, no matter your age or background.
It reminds us that music is this powerful force that can bridge cultures and generations.
And the Beatles were true masters of that language. This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. I'm going to listen to their music with a whole new level of appreciation now.
I encourage you to do the same. Pay attention to the details, the layers, the nuances. You'll be amazed by what you discover.
This has been incredible, but unfortunately we've run out of time for this part of our deep dive. Don't worry though, we'll be back soon for the second part of our exploration into the enduring magic of Beatles music.
Until then, keep those Beatles vibes flowing.
Welcome back. Last time we were really digging into that particle physics of Beatles music, exploring an innovative use of harmony and rhythm. But there's another crucial element we haven't touched on yet. Melody.
You're absolutely right. Melody is like the soul of a song. And the Beatles were masters at crafting these unforgettable ones. What's truly fascinating is how they kind of wove those melodies with their harmonic choices to create something unique and moving.
So it's not just the melody itself, it's that interplay between the melody and the chords underneath it.
Exactly. Remember how we talked about them singing notes that weren't part of the standard chords? It's like adding these unexpected brushstrokes to their musical canvas, creating the sense of color and complexity that really sets them apart.
I like that analogy. Can you give me some specific examples of how they did this?
Well, Nowhere Man is a great example. They use every single note of the chromatic scale, showing just how willing they were to push melodic boundaries.
It's almost like they're expressing the full spectrum of human emotions through those notes.
And if you listen to Lennon's isolated vocals in Your Blues, you can really hear how he utilizes that blues note continuum, bending and sliding between pitches, to create this raw, emotional sound.
It's amazing how much emotion he can pack into a single phrase. But this wasn't just about individual brilliance, was it? Their collaboration played a role in their melodic development, too.
Absolutely. Remember that story about Paul teaching John how to curve the melody in? I got a feeling they were constantly challenging and inspiring each other to reach new heights.
It reminds us that sometimes the best ideas come from bouncing things off of someone else, pushing each other out of those comfort zones.
Exactly. And each Beatle brought their own unique strengths to the table. John with his raw emotion, Paul with his gift for melody, George with his spiritual depth, and Ringo grounding them with that steady presence. It's like the perfect musical recipe.
Speaking of recipes, their melodies also played with that idea of light and shade we talked about earlier, that contrast between major and minor scales. It's like they were adding this emotional dimension to the melody itself.
You hit the nail on the head. Think of Norwegian Wood. The melody shifts between major and minor so smoothly, reflecting those bittersweet lyrics about a fleeting encounter.
It's almost like the music is mirroring the ups and downs of a relationship.
And Penny Lane is another great example. It has those dramatic drops in the melody, like the clouds passing over a sunny landscape that we discussed before.
That feeling of wistful nostalgia perfectly captured. It's amazing how they could evoke such specific emotions through those melodic choices. But melodies don't exist in a vacuum. They're brought to life by voices. And each Beatle had this distinctive vocal style that added yet another layer to their music.
You're so right. John's voice had that raw edge, conveying both vulnerability and power.
Yeah, think about the ache and help.
Oh!
Or the intensity of your blues. Like you could feel that emotion pouring out of him.
And Paul's voice had this smoothness, this melodic quality that could really soar. He could deliver those heart-wrenching lines that just stay with you.
Hey Jude is a perfect example. That vocal performance is just incredible, building and building to this epic climax. But it wasn't just John and Paul, was it? George's voice brought something special, too.
Absolutely. George's voice had this quiet strength, this sincerity that really resonated on a deep level.
Something is a perfect example of that. It's such a simple, beautiful song, made even more powerful by the emotion in George's voice. What about Ringo? He wasn't known for being a lead vocalist, but his voice still contributed to their overall sound.
You're right. Ringo might not have had the same range as the others, but his voice had this charming everyman quality that made him so relatable.
Think about, with a little help from my friends, it's such a joyous, uplifting song. And Ringo's voice perfectly captures that feeling of camaraderie and support.
It's like he's inviting everyone to join the party. But let's move beyond these individual voices for a second and talk about their harmonies. Their vocal blend was legendary.
Absolutely. What made their harmonies so special?
Well, for starters, their voices just blended beautifully together. There was this natural synergy there.
It's like their voices were destined to sing together.
Exactly. But they also had this incredible understanding of vocal arrangement. They knew how to stack their voices to create these rich, complex harmonies.
Okay, give me some examples. What are some of their most impressive harmonic moments?
Because is one that always blows me away. Those three-part harmonies are just breathtaking.
It's so ethereal and otherworldly, like something you'd hear in a dream.
And She's Leaving Home is another great example. Those close harmonies between Paul and John create this incredibly poignant, almost heartbreaking sound. It's like they're having this private conversation, sharing a secret through their voices.
And we can't forget about their use of oohs and ahs, those little vocal touches that added so much character and joy to their music.
Yes. Those little moments of playfulness are so essential to their sound. Think about songs like Help or She Love You.
It's like they're inviting us to sing along, to share in that joy and energy.
Exactly. They weren't afraid to experiment with their harmonies, using their voices as instruments to create different textures and moods. But even beyond those individual elements, the melodies, the harmonies, the unique voices, I think there's something deeper going on with their vocals.
What do you mean?
They were storytellers. They used their voices to weave narratives, to paint pictures with sound and words.
Their lyrics often felt like little movies playing in your head.
Exactly. And their voices were the perfect vehicles for bringing those stories to life.
Like in Eleanor Rigby. It's such a poignant and heartbreaking story. And their voices perfectly capture that loneliness and isolation of the characters.
And then there's A Day in the Life, which takes us on this surreal journey through an ordinary day. Their voices kind of guide us through those highs and lows, those moments of mundane reality, and those fantastical dreams.
It's like they're holding our hands and leading us through this sonic dreamscape. But it wasn't always serious and introspective. They could be incredibly funny, too.
Oh, absolutely. They never took themselves too seriously.
Maxwell's Silver Hammer, anyone. It's like they're winking at us, letting us in on the joke.
Exactly. They could convey this whole spectrum of human emotion through their voices. Sadness, joy, humor, longing, wonder. They were masters of vocal expression, and their voices were such a crucial part of what made their music so enduring.
Okay, so we've covered their incredible vocal abilities, their harmonies, and their melodic brilliance. But there's one last piece of the puzzle we need to explore: their groundbreaking use of studio techniques.
You're absolutely right. The Beatles were true innovators in the studio, always pushing the limits of what was possible. They didn't just record their music, they sculpted it, shaped it, transformed it.
It's like they treated the recording studio as an instrument itself.
Exactly. And they had this fantastic partner in crime, their producer, George Martin.
George Martin was a visionary in his own right. He understood their experimental spirit and helped them turn their sometimes wild ideas into reality.
He was the perfect collaborator, a musical genius who could bridge the gap between their imagination and those technical limitations of the time.
So how do they transform the studio into this sonic playground?
Well, they embraced these new technologies with open arms. We're talking tape loops, multi-tracking, backwards recording, all sorts of innovative techniques. It's mind-blowing to think they were creating such groundbreaking sounds in the 1960s. Long before computers and digital audio workstations.
It really speaks to their ingenuity and creativity. It's like they saw those limitations as a challenge as an opportunity to invent something new.
Exactly. Do you want to hear some specific examples of their studio wizardry?
Absolutely. Hit me with your favorites.
Tomorrow Never Knows is this sonic masterpiece built on tape loops, backwards vocals, and all sorts of manipulated sounds.
That song still sounds so futuristic and avant-garde even today.
And then there's Strawberry Fields Forever. They actually combined two completely different recordings of the song, each in a different key and tempo, to create this surreal, dreamy atmosphere.
Wow, I had no idea. It's like they were merging different realities together.
And the guitar solo in Taxman is another great example. They slowed the tape down during recording to lower the pitch, then sped it back up during playback, which created this unique, otherworldly effect.
So they were manipulating time and pitch within the recording itself. It's like musical time travel.
Exactly. They also used techniques like double tracking, recording their vocals twice and layering them together, which created this richer, more powerful sound.
It's amazing how those subtle layers can have such a huge impact on the overall sound.
They were also masters at incorporating unconventional instruments into their music. They used everything from sitars and mellotrons to orchestral strings and even animal sounds.
I remember that beautiful string arrangement in She's Leaving Home and the calliope music from an old fairground organ in Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. It's like they were constantly on the hunt for interesting new sounds and textures.
Their willingness to break the rules and experiment is a huge part of what makes their music so timeless. It's constantly surprising you, pushing boundaries, and evolving.
They were always ahead of the curve, weren't they?
They were true visionaries, and their pioneering work in the studio shaped the sound of popular music for generations to come.
It's inspiring to see how their innovative spirit continues to influence artists today.
They proved that the recording studio isn't just a place to capture sound, it's a place to create magic.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing. We've covered so much ground: their lyrics, their harmonies, their innovative use of rhythm and melody, their distinctive voices, and their groundbreaking studio techniques. But what do you think is the ultimate secret to their enduring magic? Why does their music continue to resonate with people of all ages and backgrounds, even decades later?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think it comes down to a few key ingredients. First, their music is incredibly well-crafted, both musically and lyrically. You know they knew how to write songs with catchy melodies, irresistible hooks, and harmonies that just worm their way into your brain.
They definitely knew how to write an earworm.
But it goes beyond just being catchy. Their music is also deeply emotionally resonant. They tapped into these universal human experiences, exploring themes of love, loss, hope, and longing that connect with us on this gut level.
And they did it with such honesty and vulnerability.
They weren't afraid to bare their souls, to express their doubts and fears, which is what makes their music so relatable and authentic.
It's like we get to experience their journey alongside them, sharing in their joys and sorrows.
Exactly. And there's also this infectious sense of joy and playfulness that shines through in their music.
You could hear how much fun they were having, experimenting, pushing boundaries, and just enjoying the ride. And that spirit of adventure is something that transcends time.
Their willingness to explore and take risks is what keeps their music feeling fresh and relevant, even after all these years. But they didn't exist in a bubble, did they? They were also products of their time, reflecting those social and cultural changes happening around them.
Their music certainly mirrored those times, from the early days of rock and roll to the psychedelic experimentation of the late 60s. But even though their music was a reflection of their era, it also transcended it. It speaks to something deeper, something timeless that resonates with everyone.
You're so right. It's a testament to the power of music, to connect with us on this soul level, regardless of our age or background.
This deep dive has been a revelation. I'm going to listen to their music with a whole new level of appreciation and awareness.
I encourage you to do the same. Pay attention to the details, the layers, the nuances. You'll be amazed by what you discover.
Unfortunately, we've reached the end of part 2 of our deep dive. But don't worry, we'll be back soon for the final part of our exploration into the enduring magic of Beatles music. We'll be delving into some fascinating aspects of their creative process, their influences, and their lasting legacy.
Until then, keep listening and keep those Beatles vibes flowing.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into the world of Beatles music.
It's amazing how even after all this analysis, there's still this sense of wonder surrounding them.
Absolutely. In this final part, I'm really interested in getting beyond the music itself and understanding the forces behind it. Let's start with their creative process. How did these 4 individuals come together to create something so groundbreaking?
That's a question that's puzzled music lovers for decades. And I don't think there's any one easy answer. Their creative process was always changing, just like their music.
So it wasn't as simple as, John writing the words and Paul coming up with the melody.
Not at all. It was much more collaborative, much more fluid. Sometimes John would bring an idea, sometimes Paul, sometimes George. They would bounce ideas off of each other. They would jam, experiment with different arrangements.
I love that image of them just playing together, feeding off of each other's energy. It sounds almost alchemical.
It was a true partnership. And I think that's, a key part of their magic, that synergy, that spark that ignited when they came together. And they weren't afraid to challenge each other either.
Right, like that story about Paul teaching John how to bend the melody, and I got a feeling.
Exactly. They pushed each other to be better, to take risks, to try new things. And that willingness to embrace those challenges led to so many breakthroughs.
It reminds us that great collaborations could be these incredible catalysts for creativity. Let's talk about the raw materials that they were working with. What were the influences that shaped their musical DNA?
Well, their roots were deeply embedded in rock and roll. They grew up listening to Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, Little Richard Buddy, Holly Carl Perkins, the pioneers who really broke down barriers.
The ones who set the stage for everything that came after. But they didn't stop there, did they?
No way! They were constantly seeking out new sounds, new genres. I've read they were inspired by everything from classical music to Indian ragas, from Motown to girl groups.
It's like they absorbed it all.
Yeah.
Creating this incredible musical tapestry.
Exactly. And that openness to different styles, that willingness to blend and bend genres really kind of contributed to the evolution of modern music.
It makes you wonder, what would music even sound like today if the Beatles hadn't come along?
That's a fascinating question to ponder. But to answer your earlier question about their legacy, their impact is really multifaceted musically. They expanded the boundaries of songwriting, production, and live performance.
They weren't just a band. They were this full-blown cultural phenomenon.
Absolutely. Their influence can be heard in countless artists across genres. From rock and pop to folk and electronic music, their songs are constantly being covered, sampled, reinterpreted. They've become part of our collective musical consciousness.
Like musical standards. Classics that never go out of style. But their legacy goes beyond music, doesn't it? They became these symbols of peace, love, and hope for an entire generation.
You're right. Their message of unity and love resonated so deeply, especially in a time of social and political upheaval. They used their platform to speak out against war, to promote peace, to advocate for change.
They weren't just musicians. They were cultural icons, trendsetters who influenced fashion art, even how people wore their hair.
And that influence is still felt today. Their music remains relevant. Their message continues to resonate. Their legacy keeps inspiring people around the world.
It's incredible to think that a band that was only together for a little over a decade could have left such a lasting mark on the world. It makes you wonder what that secret ingredient was. What allowed them to achieve that kind of impact?
I think it was a combination of factors. Their music was brilliant, both in terms of songwriting and performance. Their message was hopeful and universal. But perhaps most importantly, they were incredibly authentic.
They weren't afraid to be themselves, to express their vulnerabilities, to grow and evolve in front of the world.
Exactly. And that's what makes their music so timeless. It speaks to the human experience in a way that transcends time and place.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. It's like we've uncovered the layers of a musical onion, revealing these hidden depths and complexities with every listen.
It's been a joy sharing this journey with you.
I feel like I'm hearing their music with new ears now, noticing details I never picked up on before. So as we wrap up this incredible exploration, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I think it's this. The Beatles' music is a gift, a treasure to be cherished and shared. Their songs offer this portal to joy, reflection, and connection. So keep listening, keep exploring, and let the magic of the Beatles continue to enrich your life.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll bid you farewell. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the enduring magic of Beatles music.
Until next time, keep the music playing.